This is Matthew Cratter from Trader University, and today I want to answer the general question, does Bitcoin actually do anything useful, or is it just a bunch of zeros and ones, sort of a Ponzi scheme or a scam? Cole J in the comments yesterday asked some very good questions. What makes Bitcoin useful? At least gold. You can use gold in your phone, in cars, in home appliances. Gold and silver, these kind of commodities, they function as a form of money, but they're also very useful. It doesn't appear that Bitcoin is like that at all. How is Bitcoin applicable to daily life? He was also asking about, I often compare Bitcoin to a Picasso painting or Malibu real estate, and Cole was arguing that Bitcoin doesn't have the same aesthetic value of a Picasso painting, perhaps, and it certainly doesn't have the same use value as a Malibu beach house. So I think the best analogy for Bitcoin is to compare it to a savings account. So here's a Bank of America savings account. The reason you have a savings account is that if you work very hard and you spend less than you earn, this is a place for you to store your wealth, whether that wealth is $100 or $100 million. If you want to stop working at some point, if you want to have flexibility, this is the reason to build up savings. Everyone understands the value of savings accounts. You might have a brokerage account instead and choose to store the fruits of your labor in stocks or maybe in gold bars or something like this. Now, the problem with a Bank of America savings account, or really any U.S. bank, and the problem is even worse in Europe and Japan right now, is that the money supply is increasing very quickly. We have Jerome Powell running the money printers at full blast, increasing the money supply a tremendous amount over the past 50 years since 1971, when we went off the gold standard, and the money supply was actually increasing in excess of the gold reserves even before that. So the problem with this is if you work hard and you stick a lot of dollars in your savings account, you've got the bankers printing new dollars, which makes those dollars that you've earned less valuable. This is called inflation. It's also called loss of purchasing power. The analogy I always use is when I was a kid, you could get a Big Mac for something like 40 or 50 cents, and today it's closer to $4 or $5. So Bitcoin is a money-saving technology in the same way that gold is a technology. It's a money technology. It's a way of storing value. And it's a way of storing value in a way that the banksters and the central banksters cannot confiscate your wealth. So one analogy that I really like, I think I got this one from Michael Saylor, Bitcoin is a giant, super secure savings account in the cloud. It's like a giant bank that's not run by anyone. It's not controlled by these scummy Wall Street people. Anyone can open up an account. It doesn't matter your skin color, your race, your politics, your credit history. None of these things matter. No one can close your account just because they saw you at a certain rally. No one can confiscate it. No one can tell you what to do with it. And so Bitcoin in this way functions as a store of value. It's a way not only to move money across time, but to move money across space. And that way it's a bit of a medium of exchange. So a store of value is just a way of transferring your savings, the fruits of your labor, transferring this value to your future self, to your heirs, to your future self in 30 years so you can retire, maybe to your children or grandchildren, in a way that doesn't lose purchasing power. You can put the fruits of your labor in a savings account like this, but you'll earn 0.1%, and that's well below the inflation rate. The true inflation rate is probably 10 or 15% for most of us. And so you won't keep ahead. And then, of course, if someone gets mad at you, they can just freeze your account, whether you're innocent, whether you're guilty. In the U.S., we have this. We have it pretty good. This sort of thing doesn't really happen unless, at least it doesn't happen yet, unless you're doing something that's very clearly illegal. But if you're in a country in South America or a country in the Middle East or a country like Zimbabwe in Africa where the money is being rapidly devalued, Bitcoin as a savings account that's open to anyone with any net worth, with any politics, becomes increasingly important. But over this decade, it's going to become very important for people in the US and Europe and Asia as well. So Bitcoin is a store of value. It's also a way of moving value across space quickly and cheaply. Gold is a nice store of value, or at least it has been for the last 5,000 years, but gold is very difficult to store. It's risky to store. If you store it in your basement, your house becomes a honeypot for thieves. It's also very difficult to move around. If there's a change in your government that you don't like and you'd like to leave your country, and you have $1 million worth of gold, there's no way you can put that in a backpack. It's just too heavy and move it anywhere. Even if you just have $100, you could be searched at borders. And so physical gold is not a good way to move value around in space. This is one reason that the fiat money system developed, because what people did is they stored their gold in central places, centralized vaults, which became banks and became central banks, and then paper was issued against it, and then eventually that paper was totally disconnected from the underlying gold reserves, and that's where we have modern fiat money. As I said, you can move Bitcoin is very easy to move wealth around the world. And this doesn't mean you're doing it for illicit or illegal purposes. Maybe you've just made an enemy. Maybe you're Jack Ma and the Chinese government is about to put you in jail, and you haven't done really anything wrong. You just want to leave the country. And whether you have $1 billion or $10,000 or $100, you can walk across a border with Bitcoin. You store it in a hardware wallet like a Trezor. You make a recovery seed backup, which is just 12 English words in a certain order, and you can literally walk across a border with a couple $1 billion in your brain, stored in these 12 words, so then you can reconstitute it when you get to the other side. It's becoming increasingly important as high tech begins to tighten the screws on everyone and tell you what you can think, what you can't think, as we see even free speech in the US being completely crushed. It's very important, and it's even more important in countries like, for example, Venezuela, or I could think of a host of countries. I don't want to pick on any individual country. It's important to have money that is censorship resistant, that's seizure resistant. Obviously, someone can still put a gun to your head and ask for your recovery seed if you store something in a multi-sig solution. That's one way around this. That's why I'm calling this not censorship proof or seizure proof, but censorship resistant and seizure resistant. It makes sense. We're moving into an all digital world. It makes sense to have a purely digital money that is a non-sovereign backed currency. Bitcoin is not backed or controlled by any government. It's a non-sovereign store of value. It's a non-sovereign form of money in the same way that gold is not controlled or issued by any particular government. A lot of people, especially altcoiners, tend to say, well, Bitcoin's just a store of value. It's really nothing else. I have my coin that does something special. What people fail to realize is that store of value is literally the biggest use case on the planet. It has the largest TAM, total addressable market. Everyone wants to store the fruits of their labor. They want to store their wealth. Bitcoin is a place to store not only your wealth today, but it will be a place to store all future wealth that is created. So the man or woman who creates some cure for cancer or figures out how to get us to travel at the speed of light and break the laws of physics and go to different universes, whatever, these future billionaires and trillionaires will store their wealth, but they'll need a place to store their wealth. They're not going to store it in seashells. They're not going to store it in a place in fiat currencies that can be rapidly debased. And so what is the total future market cap of Bitcoin? Well, it really tends toward infinity. It's trillions, quadrillions, quintillions, etc. As it's this sort of infinitely stretchable plastic bag that the entire solar system can store its wealth in. Unlike, so a lot of gold bugs make this argument, and Cole was making it as well, that gold is useful as money because it has these industrial purposes. There's gold in every iPhone, there's gold in your car, etc. What I would argue is that the purest forms of money actually would not have any industrial purposes. Money is not a commodity. A commodity is something that, something like corn or wheat or or crude oil or something. Then we have the precious metals, silver and gold, which trade. They're a little bit like commodities, but they trade a little bit like what are called monetary goods. They trade with a monetary premium. So if gold were just used in iPhones and electronics, etc., and possibly in jewelry is sort of a transition case, a border case, in the sense that some people buy gold jewelry, especially in places like India, for example, as a family heirloom, as a store of value, in addition to a very beautiful thing that you can look at and wear and transport. But if you're just looking at the industrial purposes, I'm not sure if this includes jewelry or not, it doesn't really matter. The point is that gold trades at a price that's much higher than where it would trade if it were just another industrial commodity. So a lot of people, especially gold bugs, think that in order for something to be money, it has to be useful. We know this is clearly not true. Those paper US dollars in your pocket, those digital dollars in your bank account and credit card, they don't do anything except function as money. They're monetary goods. They're not even very good. They're very easy to send around, but they're not good stores of value. So U.S. modern fiat currency is very good for medium of exchange. It's very nice to be able to buy stuff very quickly online. But if you want to store value in it, it's a very bad place to store value. So I would argue that Bitcoin is a better form of money technology than gold. And gold trades with a monetary premium. It trades above where it were if it were just another commodity. Now, what happens over time is occasionally a form of money. Some Native Americans on the east coast of the U.S. use seashells, or what was called wampum, as a form of money before the early settlers came from England and elsewhere. And what happened is when these Europeans discovered that the Native Americans were using seashells for money, what they did is they got their big boats, they went to various parts of the world or just offshore and dug up giant amounts of seashells, used it to buy land, etc. And in addition to guns, germs, and steel, this was one way that the Native American culture and economy was destroyed. So if you store your wealth in an inferior store of value, very bad things can happen. And this can happen to anyone. I certainly don't want to single out Native Americans. But this is something that could happen to gold as well. In fact, I'm certain, I'm 100% certain that this will happen to gold. Gold is a relic in the modern era. And if gold is ever demonetized, in other words, if it ever loses this monetary premium, it will trade like any other metal based on industrial supply and demand. Supply and demand for electronics, supply and demand for jewelry. The price will probably go down. The estimates I've seen are anywhere from 50 to 90%. We'll say the price will go down about 70% and probably never recover, simply because there's so much gold in vaults everywhere. And if gold were to become just another industrial commodity, there's plenty of gold in the world to supply us for a very, very long period of time. If prices were to go down this much, obviously all the gold mines would have to shut down, probably indefinitely as well, simply because their marginal cost of production would be well above where the industrial price of gold is. So I want to dispel this notion that something has to be useful in the real world to be money. A share of stock, for example, a share of Apple stock, it's not that useful. It does pay a small dividend, but it is and has been a good place to store your wealth. If you're finding this video helpful, I'd encourage you to hit that subscribe and hit that like button. So Bitcoin, unlike gold, is pure money. It's a purely monetary good. It's a pure store of value whose pricing, and this is what makes Bitcoin so interesting, its pricing is uncontaminated by industrial commodity drivers, unlike silver and gold. Silver has even more industrial uses than gold. Bitcoin functions, it has all the classical attributes of money. It's divisible, it's portable, it's much easier to verify or assay than gold is. Gold, you have to perform chemical tests or melt it down. There's a lot of fake gold bars in the world. If you're accepting delivery of $1 billion worth of gold, Very, very difficult to verify that all of that is pure 24 karat gold. Bitcoin is very easy to store. As we said, you can store it in your brain, you can store it in a hardware wallet. Very easy to hide, much easier to hide and move around than is gold. Bitcoin is a pure monetary good. But what makes it the best form of money is that it is hard money. The monetary supply of Bitcoin grows very slowly. And over time, this growth rate is slowing down as we have the various halvings. And so the miner subsidy goes down over time as well. There's less and less Bitcoin being mined every 4 years. If you want to store your wealth in a place that will preserve its purchasing power, you need to store it in scarce assets. You would never store your wealth in sand. You would never store your wealth in dirt. You would never store your wealth in something like apples or oranges, obviously because they rot. You want to store your wealth, the product, and we're not just talking again about wealthy people. This is anyone. This is someone who has a net worth of $10 in Brazil or Argentina or somewhere in Africa, and it's equally true for someone who has $1 billion in the US. If you store your wealth in an Argentinian peso, it loses purchasing power over time. This is why a lot of Argentinians they'll store most of their savings in US dollars, and then they'll slowly convert it to pesos, or in Venezuela, they'll convert it to bolivars as they need to spend it. So for people in these countries, storing their wealth in US dollars is a huge improvement over the local currency. For people in the US, storing your wealth in gold or stocks or real estate or Bitcoin is a huge improvement over storing your wealth in US dollars. And we're also seeing, obviously, people in all these countries all over the world, especially countries that have very high monetary inflation rates, storing their money also increasingly in Bitcoin, especially if they can't get their hands on US dollars or US dollar stable coins. Hard money is just money that's difficult to increase the supply. Soft money, I want you to think seashells, wampum, US dollars. The Fed can just press a button and create trillions of new US dollars out of nowhere. It's very easy to increase the US money supply. This is why it has been increasing over time. If you had a money printer in your house and you could print yourself fresh US dollar bills, you would do that all day long. We can't expect the government to have any more discipline than we would have. Useful things are great, but they're not necessarily a good place to store your wealth. You want to store your wealth in scarce assets that have what we would call a high stock to flow, where the monetary supply is not increasing very quickly. Electricity is very useful, but no one stores their wealth in electricity. Corn and wheat are very useful. Bad places to store your wealth, obviously, because they slowly biodegrade. Even something like crude oil. It's wonderful if you live in a country where you discover this huge supply of crude oil under the ground. But if you're someone like Bill Gates or Elon Musk and you already have a lot of wealth, you would never convert it into crude oil. Crude oil is not a good place to store wealth in order to preserve its purchasing power over long periods of time. And this is simply because when oil prices go up a lot, oil producers pump a lot of oil, a lot of new oil, and they rapidly increase the supply and drive prices back down. There's a saying among commodity traders that the best cure for high prices is high prices. This is what commodities are. They trade based on supply and demand. They're interchangeable. A barrel of crude oil of a certain sulfur specification is the same as any other barrel of oil that has that same chemical composition. This is what commodities are. Corn that trades on the futures exchanges, all that corn is basically the same thing. It's not special. It's not like one Picasso painting versus another Picasso painting. What makes gold very interesting, and silver as well to a lesser extent, is that gold does not, the supply of new gold coming online from gold miners does not appreciably increase even when you have high gold prices. Gold supplies increase about 1.8% every year on average, no matter what. By contrast, when crude oil was trading at $100 or $150 a barrel briefly, about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, there was a huge glut of oil that was pumped in response to those high prices. And Bitcoin is very different here. Gold is somewhat limited on planet Earth. There's a lot under the oceans. There's a lot in the asteroid belt. There's a lot in the solar system. Bitcoin is even more scarce. It's algorithmically fixed. It's fixed by the software code. You'd have to get everyone who's a Bitcoiner to agree to dilute themselves. This software code will not be changed, at least for a very long period of time. And so the supply of Bitcoin really is fixed at 21 million. 4 million, 5 million have been lost, including probably Satoshi's coins, or haven't been moved. And so the real supply of Bitcoin is something like 16 or 17 million coins. This is very nice. It's very easy to verify. If you run a full node, you can verify that what you have is real Bitcoin. And you can also verify that the maximum supply is not being increased. By contrast, it's very, very difficult to calculate even how much gold there is in the world. So that's what's nice about something like Bitcoin. It's a very pure form of money. One way you can tell whether something is a good store of value is to look at a chart of it over time. This is crude oil, WTI crude, and we can see here that there was a one-time revaluation in the 70s when the U.S. moved more from a gold standard to a crude oil standard. The U.S. dollar was implicitly backed by crude oil, or at least by trade in crude oil, and so prices were allowed to rise. But since then, the price of crude oil has been very volatile, and it's been mostly sideways. You can see how mean reverting it is here. When you get very high prices in crude oil, the oil producers pump a lot more, and they drive the price back down somewhere to the mean or the average. By contrast, monetary goods like silver and gold, the chart looks more like this, where it's up and to the right. We can look at these things inflation adjusted, where they're adjusted for the CPI as well, and the chart even looks worse when you do that. We can see silver here has not really kept up with inflation as well as one might think, and this is CPI inflation, which obviously understates everything. Here's a chart of gold over time. This is what a good store value looks like. Looks a lot actually like the chart of Bitcoin, where we had a peak of 20,000 and then hitting new highs, gold hitting new highs in 2020. And this is with, as we said, gold has a lot of problems. It's an inferior money technology to Bitcoin, but it's a useful metaphor for understanding Bitcoin as digital gold. And this is why I'm extremely sympathetic to gold bugs. I used to be one myself, and I think once you understand gold, it's just one short step to understanding why Bitcoin is superior. Even if we look at inflation, CPI adjusted chart of gold, not nearly as mean reverting as these other commodities. So to conclude, and if you want further reading, you can check out Plan B's article here, where he really goes into the idea of stock to flow, which I've discussed in previous videos as well, is you want to store your wealth in a pure monetary good that is scarce, that has a fixed supply. This is why I compare Bitcoin to Picasso paintings or Malibu real estate. You can't make any more land on the coast in California. Picasso's been dead for many years. There are no more Picasso paintings that will ever be painted. Picasso paintings obviously have aesthetic value. It's nice to live on the beach in California. You can also create cash flow through these houses. These are proxies. These are ways of storing wealth. These are stores of value. And I think eventually Bitcoin begins to demonetize even fine art and scarce real estate, simply because it's a much easier way of storing wealth. Even if you store your wealth in a Malibu beach real estate property, you still have to pay property taxes, and who knows what the California state government is going to do to your taxes. You have maintenance, etc. Likewise, for a Picasso, you have huge storing in Picasso, and insuring it is extremely expensive. By contrast, storing Bitcoin is very easy. And so this is my argument to people like Cole, who ask very good questions. And this is why people just aren't used to thinking of monetary goods. People understand stocks. People understand commodities like corn and crude oil. But once you start studying money and you start asking yourself, really, what is it? A medium of exchange, a store of value, a unit of account, these various functions of money, you begin to realize that Bitcoin has a chance of becoming the biggest, most important store of value in the world. This is what we saw in 2020 and what we're seeing in 2021 as billionaires move their balance sheet into Bitcoin, as corporations, as Wall Street moves its various balance sheets and institutional investments into Bitcoin. If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe and like button. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.